CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the program. Our top stories.
People lost everything. Homes, jobs, their cars, some their pets. There's still people missing.
The worst natural disaster Hawaii has ever seen. At least 55 people dead as wildfires devastate the island of Maui. Our other headlines, tensions grow in West Africa as leaders ready troops for military intervention in Niger after the coup. Reaching for the moon, Russia launches its first lunar mission in nearly 50 years. India is in the race too. And Sweden and Spain book a Women's World Cup semi-final date as Japan and the Netherlands are knocked out. The death toll from the wildfires sweeping the U.S. state of Hawaii have risen to 55 people and hundreds more are still missing. The state governor says it's the largest natural disaster in Hawaii's history. At least 1,000 buildings have been destroyed on the island of Maui. Firefighters are still battling to contain the blazes, which began on Tuesday. Tens of thousands of visitors have been moved to safety, while some residents were forced to jump into the sea to escape the flames.
We had to get out. We left our vehicle, and myself, my wife, and our 5 kids, we all got in the ocean. We found a floating board that we hung on to, and we think we were out there floating, and this is so surreal, and everything was burning around, explosions, cars blowing up, like embers was flying. We couldn't breathe. We couldn't breathe. There's no air. It's just like carbon monoxide, and we held on as best as we could. They got us, and they're really tired, exhausted, and at some point, this ocean almost swept my kids away a few times, but yeah, we stuck together. We held on. We're not gonna die this way, no. And then we're here. We're alive.
People lost everything. Homes, jobs, their cars, some their pets. There's still people missing. I fought wildfires in California, and I was here yesterday when it flared up, and I've never seen something ravage so fast.
Our correspondent Claire Rush is at Hawaii's Kahului Airport.
Evacuation shuttles have been arriving here, dozens that I've seen so far, with at least 30 or 40 people on board each one. And those shuttles are arriving from the western side of the island where that devastating wildfire razed Lahaina, the historic town, to the ground. People getting off of these shuttle buses are expressing, a combination of relief to be alive, to be safe, but also expressing feelings of shock and confusion and deep sadness. They described the scenes that they saw driving to the airport on those shuttles, saying, it looked apocalyptic, charred landscapes. Lahaina, the town they had visited only just days before as tourists burned to the ground. So people arriving here are kind of in a state of shock, and it's a bit of a scramble as well. A lot of people weren't planning to leave today, so some folks are trying to figure out last-minute travel plans. The lines here at the airport are incredibly long. They're snaking all throughout. Some people are showing up. They don't even have a boarding pass. They don't have a flight. Some of the folks who are helping navigate tourists here are telling them that there are certain airlines that are trying to work with people who don't have boarding passes to get them on some of the extra flights that have been commissioned to leave the airport today. But overall, just feelings of sadness, shock, and now confusion and stress as people try to figure out what to do next.
Now, the rest of the day's news. And Tropical Storm Kanun is bringing heavy rain to the DPRK after moving away from Japan. The extreme weather prompted authorities there to issue a high alert for flooding, even as the weather system was downgraded to a tropical depression. The DPRK is deploying the military to try to protect farms and crops, as well as the wider economy. And one person has died and another is missing in South Korea after Khanun swept through the country, causing extensive damage, including landslides and flooding. Our correspondent Jack Barton reports.
South Korea's Department of Meteorology says Typhoon Khanun gained in strength before making landfall here on the southern tip of the country that was already on a state of high alert. More than 10,000 people were preemptively evacuated. 166 coastal areas and 500 roads closed, along with 180 sea routes and hundreds of flights and trains suspended. Yet rescuers still had to work around the clock to save people trapped in cars and buildings and many other sites by the floodwaters caused by rains of up to 100 millimeters per hour. The typhoon became the first since records began in 1951 to travel from south to north through the peninsula. The DPRK also reported heavy rains and strong winds as Khanun made its way towards the demilitarized zone. In South Korea, more than 1,600 schools were closed for the day, with the government taking no chances after more than 40 people were killed or injured in recent heavy rains. Extra care was also ordered by the government for the 36,000 scouts remaining in South Korea who'd already had to abandon their trouble-plagued Jamboree site because of the approaching typhoon. Jack Barton, CGTN, Goje in South Korea.
China's Hebei province has released an update on the severe flooding to hit the region there, reporting 29 deaths with 16 people still missing. This comes just 2 days after the nearby Beijing region reported 33 people dead with 16 still unaccounted for. The devastation has also hit the economy at a cost of more than $13 billion. Our correspondent Joey Shin reports.
In this warehouse in Zhuozhou, staff are trying to save the books that haven't been ruined by the floods. Zhuozhou is an important place for the book publishing industry. There are many warehouses here, most belonging to middlemen who distribute books from publishing houses to libraries and other institutions. In this warehouse, it is estimated that at least 80% of the books, nearly 500,000 volumes, will be ruined. Most of the ruined books will have to be thrown away. Most middlemen run small and micro enterprises which cannot withstand such heavy losses. On August 4th, the e-commerce platform Taobao launched a campaign to help disaster-stricken book businesses. Taobao set up a special event for Zhuozhou, and within 3 days, nearly 120 affected book businesses signed up in the city. Since the launch of the campaign, many people have bought books from Zhuozhou. The cumulative turnover for orders has exceeded 30 million yuan, that's around $4 million, helping small and medium-sized businesses affected by the disaster to recover. Beyond the book industry, the restaurant and hotel industry has also been hit hard. The underground power supply equipment, water pumps, and central air conditioning facilities were all damaged by the flooding. Some facilities can be repaired, and most of the equipment needs to be replaced. Despite being without normal water and power supplies for nearly 2 weeks, this restaurant still cooked meals for people affected by the floods in surrounding areas.
就是我就告诉我们餐饮部的员工，咱们宁可2天不吃饭，也得供这些抢险人员，还有咱们这个小区的业主呀，包括这个过路的这个灾民，都要给他们免费提供盒饭。到现在为止，我们大概提供的盒饭的人次应该是在1万左右了。
Zhao says it would take at least a month for the restaurant to fix and replace damaged equipment and reopen to the public. In some businesses, such as express delivery, staff have been able to get back to work much sooner.
然后在8月6号的时间呢，然后我们公司也恢复了供电，员工们呢也是积极的来到公司自发的组织清理这些淤泥，还有消杀工作。 目前为止呢，咱们已经是清理掉了3万多的库存派件，还剩下3万多件，预计还需要2到3天的时间就可以完全清理完毕了。
Working together in the aftermath of a great disaster, residents of Zhuozhou hope the worst is over and life will soon return to normal. 周一星 CGTN 涿州 City 河北 Province。
One person has been killed and 16 injured in a Russian airstrike on a hotel in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia. President Zelensky says a fire broke out in the building after it was hit by a missile on Thursday. This hotel is frequently used by staff from the United Nations and aid agencies. It's the second strike on Zaporizhzhia in 2 days. In Kyiv, a children's hospital has been damaged in the latest Russian strikes on the Ukrainian capital. Explosions were reported across the city early on Friday, but Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said air defense systems intercepted all Russian drones before they could land. Ukraine says it's opening a corridor in the Black Sea to allow the release of grain and other goods. Kyiv says cargo ships that have been backed up in its ports since the conflict began last year may now be able to leave. Ukraine describes the corridor as transparent and humanitarian, with security cameras on board the ships. West African countries are readying troops for a possible military intervention in Niger. The Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, says they still hope for a peaceful resolution following the coup at the end of July. The assembling of forces from bloc countries is likely to take weeks. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Deji Badamosi, in Lagos, in neighbouring Nigeria. Deji, any reaction from the leaders of the military coup to that ECOWAS move to put troops on standby?
Well, Jamie, there's been no direct reaction yet, nothing yet from the military junta in Niger. What we do know is that a heavy demonstration in support of the junta is being planned for today. So supporters of the junta are planning to stage a demonstration in the capital, Niamey, to declare further support now for the junta there. But apart from that, the defense chiefs of the ECOWAS region, following that meeting yesterday, have announced another meeting. So the defense chiefs will be meeting in Accra, Ghana on Saturday to finalize action now on the activation of that standby force. So they will begin active work now after that their meeting now on Saturday. Now, in terms of President Bazoum himself, nothing has been heard of him, but well, what we do know is that from what we're hearing, the junta has also said it does not plan to release him, and that if there's any intervention at all, we understand some of the junta leaders now have said they would not hesitate to probably kill him. So it's still a fluid situation in Niger, and well, everyone is now looking forward to that meeting by the defense chiefs on Saturday in Ghana. Jamie?
Deji, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Deji Badamosi, in Lagos, in neighbouring Nigeria. Well, France says it fully supports the West African regional leaders in their attempts to try to restore democracy in Niger, be it militarily or diplomatic. France is the former colonial power in Niger, and there's a lot at stake for Paris. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports.
More than 2 weeks on from the coup in Niger, and there is still uncertainty over the direction and governance of the country, with West African neighbours calling for the reinstatement of deposed President Mohamed Bazoum. That's also the position of France, which has supported ECOWAS sanctions on the army in Niger. For a large section of the Nigerian public, the target of popular anger is evident. It's France. Mass rallies have been held calling for an end to French influence, and, in what will concern Western allies, there have been shows of support for Russia. Since the military takeover, France has been running evacuation flights, taking more than 1,000 people to safety out of Niger. Not only its own citizens, but people from more than 40 other countries. The French government has to walk a careful path during this crisis, wanting to see the return of Mohamed Bazoum to office in Niger and maintain its influence in the region, but bearing in mind the optics of its imperialist history. Niger gained its independence from France in 1960, but there are still colonial hangovers, like the Central African franc, or CFA, which was set up in 1945. Today, it's the national currency of 14 countries, one of them Niger, and all but 2 former French colonies. The CFA is pegged to the euro, and members are required to deposit half their foreign exchange reserves with the French Treasury in Paris. Alongside monetary policy, there are also highly sought-after raw materials. France's state-owned company Orano runs several mines in Niger to extract uranium that's needed to run the fleet of civil nuclear reactors across France. In the last 2 years, there have been military coups in Mali and Burkina Faso, both former French colonies, and both now free of French troops after the generals who took control demanded their withdrawal. France has 1,500 soldiers in Niger, and it will be nervous about the possibility of another reduction in its military operations in the Sahel region if the military rulers in Niger call for France to pull out, as their neighbours did. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Choppy waters ahead for the UK government. Its controversial barge for housing migrants is now hit by Legionnaire's disease.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
This week on Razor, searching for direct evidence of dark matter by recreating the conditions of the very early universe.
We don't know 85% of the mass of our universe. We know so little about dark matter. Yes, we see some evidences of its existence, but we never had smoking gun proof of the dark matter existence.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. The worst natural disaster Hawaii has ever seen. At least 55 people dead as wildfires devastate the island of Maui. Our other headlines: tensions grow in West Africa as leaders ready troops for military intervention in Niger after the coup. Asylum seekers are being moved off a residential barge in England after bacteria which can cause Legionnaire's disease was found on board. This comes days after more than a dozen men boarded the Bibi Stockholm, which was due to house up to 500 migrants as they wait for their asylum claims to be processed. Some local people have objected to this barge. Others in the community have offered their support to the migrants. Well, the number of people who have crossed the English Channel in small boats in the past 5 years has now passed 100,000. At least 755 migrants were detected in the Channel on Thursday. That's the highest daily figure this year. It's a blow to the UK government, which has this week made a series of tough announcements on illegal migration. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has made stopping the small boat crossings one of his priorities. Russia has launched its first moon mission in almost 50 years. A rocket carrying a lunar landing craft has blasted off from a spaceport in the country's far east. The Luna 25 is expected to orbit the moon's surface for 5 days before landing on its southern pole. This comes as India launched its own space mission to the same part of the moon. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Dasha, it's being reported that the Russians are seeking evidence of water on the moon's surface. What's being said about the launch there?
Well, that's right. Russia's Luna 25 is the country's first lunar lander in almost half a century and the first one in Russia's modern history. So we understand that the lander that is weighing about 800 kilos is due to reach the lunar orbit in about 5 days, but it will then spend from 3 to 7 days choosing the right spot before landing on the lunar South Pole area. We understand this is of particularly complex matter because all the previous landings have been taking place in the equatorial zone of the moon, so that's why the expectation is that indeed there will be this smooth landing. We also understand that the main goal of the mission is to study the lunar's polar soil and to find the traces of ice, which of course will show that there is water that could later be used for the further research. So we understand that the Russian lunar mission is also racing against the India's one, with India launching its Chandrayaan-3 lunar lander last month, and if successful, then India will become only the 4th country able to land its lander on the moon in modern history after the Soviet Union, the United States and China. But for Russia, of course, it is of particular importance at this very moment. We understand that Moscow has its ambitions to prove that it is able to launch such missions even despite the Western sanctions that have been imposed against the Russian Federation after the start of its so-called special military operation in Ukraine. So certainly we have heard the Russian president earlier speaking about the resumption of its lunar mission and saying that the Soviet Union was the first country that sent a man to space in 1961 despite a total sanctions regime. So that's why at this moment it is of particular importance to Russia. And President Vladimir Putin said that Russia is guided by the ambition of our ancestors to move forward despite any difficulties and despite external attempts to prevent Russia from moving forward.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has arrived in Malaysia after ending his trip to Singapore. He met the Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim and the Foreign Minister. Our correspondent Ryan Meltzer reports now from Penang.
Well, the reason that these meetings were taking place here in Penang, up in the north of Malaysia, was that Malaysia's Prime Minister and his government ministers are very busy with last-minute campaigning for 6 state elections that happen tomorrow. But they took plenty of time to meet with Wang Yi, which I think really underlines the importance of the bilateral ties and also the close personal relations that many of them actually do enjoy with Wang Yi. This is his 6th visit to the country, and he spent more than 3 hours here, meeting first with the Prime Minister, then he was joined by other senior cabinet ministers, including the Minister of Tourism and the Transport Minister, other senior figures, the Chief Minister of Penang Province, and then he broke off for bilateral talks with the Foreign Minister as well. And in the opening remarks, Wang Yi pointed to the fact that this is the 10th anniversary of the strategic comprehensive economic strategic partnership between the two countries, as well as coming up next year, the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two countries. So there was an effort to sort of celebrate this comprehensive strategic partnership between the two countries, to build on that, build on the people-to-people ties, the R&D, the scientific exchanges, educational exchanges, students going back and forth between the countries, as well as, of course, there's trade and investment and strategic ties as well, and lay the groundwork for the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties coming up next year, which I'm sure will be marked with some major celebrations and special events. And Malaysia is hoping that President Xi will come next year as well, as Prime Minister Anwar invited him during his visit to China in March. But clearly the two sides are keen to take the relationship to another level, although Malaysia and China already enjoy such strong ties, diplomatic, economic, strategic, people-to-people, cultural, historic, but there's always room for more. And so that's clearly the goal of this meeting, and why Anwar broke away from his campaign and his ministers broke away from their election campaign for hours to entertain and enjoy deep and meaningful talks with Wang Yi.
Our correspondent Ryan Meltzer reporting from Penang. India, Japan and the United States and Australia have held the Malabar naval exercise off the coast of Sydney. This is the first time the exercises, which were previously held in the Indian Ocean, have taken place off Australia. Ships from the four countries were joined by Australian fighter jets and surveillance aircraft and submarines. South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma, has been spared from returning to prison. The 81-year-old was handed a 15-month sentence in 2021 for defying an investigation into corruption. He was freed on medical grounds, although that was ruled illegal by the courts. After surrendering to the authorities on Friday, Zuma was released under a scheme to address prison overcrowding. Junior doctors in England have begun a 4-day strike demanding better pay. This is the 5th round of industrial action as doctors demand a 35% pay rise after what they say is years of below-inflation rises. The government has offered a 6% increase, saying it won't negotiate further. Hospitals have warned the National Health Service will be forced to cancel thousands of appointments, this on top of long waiting lists. The United States Supreme Court has put a block on OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma's $6 billion bankruptcy settlement. The White House challenged the legality of this deal, which would shield members of the Sackler family who own the company from legal action over their role in the opioid epidemic. The Supreme Court will hear arguments before the end of the year as to whether the settlement can proceed. A light aircraft has been forced into an emergency landing on a UK highway after it suffered a suspected engine failure. Footage shows the plane perched across the central barrier of the road between the cities of Cheltenham and Gloucester. The police confirm none of the plane's passengers or car drivers were injured. Dozens of football fans arrested following violent clashes in Greece, which left one person dead, have appeared in court. The charges include involvement in a criminal organisation, disturbing the peace, and bodily harm. More than 100 people have been arrested since a man was killed during clashes between AEK Athens and Dynamo Zagreb supporters ahead of their Champions League qualifying match. Sweden are into the Women's World Cup semi-finals after they beat Japan by 2-1. Japan were one of the standout teams at this tournament, but Sweden raced into a 2-goal lead. Japan then missed a penalty before a late strike gave them hope. But Sweden held on to move within one game of their first World Cup final since 2003. And Sweden's opponents will be Spain, who have reached the last four for the first time. They needed extra time to beat the Netherlands by 2-1. The Dutch had equalised in stoppage time, but teenage winger Salma Parayuelo came off the bench to secure Spain's victory in the 111th minute. The headlines again. The worst natural disaster Hawaii has ever seen. At least 55 people dead as the wildfires devastate the island of Maui. Our other headlines: tensions grow in West Africa as leaders ready troops for military intervention in Niger after last month's coup. And Russia has launched its first mission to the moon in nearly 50 years. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.